You're good.
Yeah, I've got everything. I've got the questions, I've got the bios. Okay, I'm gonna start with you, like the recording. Recording. Hi everyone. Go ahead. Oh, yeah. Oh, you good? Okay, brilliant. Hi everyone, welcome to today's Dalton seminar, all online and in the room. Good to see you all. So today's seminar is on measuring inclusion and diversity in nuclear, which is a hugely challenging and important area that's required to ensure that the nuclear industry can attract and retain excellent people from all backgrounds. I'm really pleased to welcome our amazing panel today. On my right, we've got Mwanje, who's the co-founder of Inclusion and Diversity in Nuclear, a non-profit industry-led organization, which aims to complement the great work and initiatives that are already happening and to provide support and enablement at an industry level nationwide. She's also the MD and founder of Creative Solutions, founded in 2015, which provides strategic consultancy services for organizations seeking growth and transformation in nuclear and other regulated sectors. She's also been an invited speaker and panelist at international events, speaking to attendees about inclusion, diversity, and equity. She's a STEM ambassador and enjoys supporting events at schools and colleges, highlighting career paths and opportunities for students. And she's also a board director and steering group member for Northern Nuclear Alliance, as well as an external advisory board member for the EPSRC Centre for Doctoral Training in Fusion Energy, which I know quite a few of the audience are on as well, which is fantastic. So welcome, Monica.
Thank you.
To her right, we've got Nicola Summers, who works for Jacobs as an operations coordinator. Beyond her day job, she's an active local leader in several employee networks, and she supported the formation of the Rainbow Forum through collaboration with LGBTQIA+ communities and IND working groups across nuclear. And she's also a member of the Inclusion and Diversity in Nuclear Advisory Group. So welcome, Nicola.
Thank you.
And last but not least, to her right, we've got Professor Scott Heath, Manchester's very own Director of Education for the Dalton Nuclear Institute, Principal Investigator for the Green Nuclear Doctoral Training Centre, and Associate Dean for Postgraduate Researchers and Research Development for the Faculty of Science and Engineering at the University. So yeah, welcome to all of our speakers. For the format of the kind of discussion, we do have questions, but I really want to have a dialogue with the audience as well. So anyone online, if you've got a question, please put it in the chat or raise your hand, and in the room, just put your hand up at any point if you've got a question at any point during the discussion as well, because I think we want to keep that conversation going. So the first question that I'm going to start with, which is a really easy one, is what are the main challenges and opportunities for improving inclusion and diversity in nuclear? Don't know who wants to kick off with that one.
I'm happy to go first, if that's okay with the rest of the panel.
Yeah.
So challenges and opportunities. I think there are so many opportunities, particularly with some of the new developers, some of the new technology that's coming into the industry. You've got so many startups who can start fresh, start off on the right foot in terms of how they attract their staff, how they retain them, how they build an inclusive, workforce and inclusive culture from the off. Because it's a lot easier to build something intentionally when you're thinking about everyone you wish to include. But I think a big challenge for the industry is you've got some quite well-established organisations, and I always hear the phrase, it's like trying to turn a big tanker ship in terms of really trying to affect and impact actually inclusion and diversity across existing organisations, because we all know as humans, as much as we say we want to change, we don't necessarily like how the change needs to happen. We may not like how it feels. I also think another challenge is transparency and being willing to talk about things we don't necessarily want to talk about, because there's so many different topics which in the past were considered taboo or personal and not part of the workplace, even though you might be treated less than because of your identity, who you are, who you enter the workplace as. But people said we don't talk about that, or it doesn't exist here. So I think the challenge is being specific about the issues within pockets of the industry, within different organisations, understanding where they've come from, how to fix it, being open to talk about it, and being open to understanding some of it may not make you feel as good as you'd like, but being willing to actually work through it as well. So I'm going to pass on to the others so I don't just chat.
Okay. I would say the first point, picking up on what Monica said, really is kind of the next generation of people that we're trying to attract to the business. Graduates are telling us that it's important to them to be somewhere that recognises that their identity is important, that recognises them as an individual, that kind of creates somewhere where they can belong. And graduates are choosing not only somewhere related to their discipline, but somewhere that's got all the things that are important to them as well, that can see not just a policy, but kind of an intentionality and a commitment to kind of making an organisation of not just solutions, but supporting the people behind that solution, supporting the people, being more people-centred. And I would also say, I was trying to think what I was going to say, in terms of the new challenges in the industry with new technologies that we're trying to build, the push for growth and kind of us addressing the climate crisis, to drive that innovation, we need to have the diversity of thought. So we don't just want all the same people from all the same backgrounds. We want to make sure that for us to deliver as an industry, we need to make sure it's somewhere that people can find where they belong.
Absolutely, I think that's so important, linking to the climate crisis, because that's something that affects a lot of people in many different places around the world. So yeah, really good point. Scott, did you have anything?
Yeah, I just discovered that the challenge of going last is that they picked over. I think just building on those 2 points, I think one of the great opportunities, especially in nuclear, is the sort of the skills gap and the, you know, every company needs to recruit, everybody is looking for new people, means that actually the industry has to change. Otherwise it can't just recruit the same people because everybody's fighting over the same people. So if it's actually brave and steps out of its comfort zone and says, no, we're going to do something, we need to do something different, then I think it's an opportunity and a challenge. I think, and again, I feel picking up something which Mike said about having those conversations. I think the other challenge is it's not just talking about difficult things, but it's also challenging when the wrong thing is said, and having the confidence to, I guess, be an active bystander and stand up and say that isn't okay. And in big organisations with cultures that maybe are a little bit slower, the Titanic type cultures, that's quite hard to do.
Yeah, really, really good point. This wasn't one of our questions, but I think linked to that, because you mentioned different types of organisations. What do you think the differences are in the challenges between academia and industry? If that's something you can touch on.
So I'll say something. Maybe I thought naively, that academia would obviously be leading the way in this space, because you know we're academia and we're much freer, aren't we, in what we do and how we do it. Actually, I think having worked closely with the nuclear industry and some of the big organisations, I actually think we're behind the curve, and the NDA and some of the big companies, their EDI agendas and policies are way ahead of anything we're doing at university, and that's a challenge I didn't expect to face. I think it can be quite difficult to change cultures in any big organisation, and the key is to change things at the top and the bottom, and then hopefully we squeeze the meat in the middle. Yeah. Absolutely.
Nicola, Monica, do you want to add anything to that?
I can't really speak for academia, but it's quite a while since I was there, but I would say in industry, it's certainly helped that we can collaborate in an ED&I space, whereas we might be competing with some people or fighting for attention from big customers. We've been able to find a level ground at grassroots to share a lot of stuff and share that common thread and show why ED&I is so important.
No, I've got the pleasure of being last. Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said, and I think there's probably areas maybe where academia is ahead, where maybe there's cutting edge research, there's people maybe doing the social science projects and maybe understand some of the different barriers that may exist for people either entering the workforce or staying in the workforce. So they have that data, they have that information, and maybe they've come up with some solutions that maybe sometimes aren't as visible within sort of industry per se as well. But then I'd say in industry, there are, like it's been highlighted, a number of organisations that, you know, they've got the people in there who are bringing experience, not just from within nuclear, but from other industries as well, in terms of programmes that have worked, different initiatives, different ways in which they've either recruited people or sorted out retention issues. And I think because of maybe there's a bit more churn at times, I think, in the industry, I think maybe we sometimes get more of those fresh ideas from that sense as well.
Absolutely. Moving on to the next question. Do we think measuring inclusion should go beyond measuring diversity, and what are the key performance indicators of measuring inclusion? don't know who wants to start off with that question. Nicola's shaking her head. I think there's several answers to that. Monica, I'll stop. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think I'm going to do the tip back academic thing actually, and not ask the question you've answered, ask me. But do I think inclusion should go beyond diversity? In a way that depends how you define diversity and how you define inclusion. And I tend to not think of them as any different. For me, if we're being totally inclusive, then I forgot the word. The first word begin. Then that remind me. I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. Should measuring inclusion go beyond measuring diversity?
So if we're being inclusive, then if we're being completely inclusive, then we're also going to be diverse in my mind to its very definition.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that frustrates me constantly when we talk about equality and diversity is in a lot of circles it's just male female and that's it. If we've done male female, then we've done diversity and we've done inclusivity. And certainly that's one thing that working with Monica's helped me realize is that it's so much broader than that. And I think now we've probably broadened out, certainly in the CDT and in recruitment, to diversity and inclusivity is as broad as it can possibly be. And that's I don't think I answered your question, but I've worded wrong.
No, but I think it's an important point about being intersectional in our approaches, for sure. Nicola, did you want to add anything there?
Beyond measure, I'm trying to think, beyond measure and diversity. It's hard because it's things that you can measure, I guess, but I was thinking more about seeing some of the tools or some of the practices that you've introduced as part of your policies, seeing if they're actually, people are engaging them and using them regularly, even if it's just something as simple as how regularly people use closed captions on Teams and actually activate things like that, or if people are using the accessible templates when they're designing new documents and seeing that that's carried through. But yeah, it depends what I would say as well. I don't know. Sorry, this is the question that I was struggling with. But I would say as well, maybe inclusion in terms of who is joining your organisation, who's staying in your organisation, what are their backgrounds, what's their educational backgrounds as much as their heritage and everything else. But yeah, I would say it's seeing how much people are engaging rather than just seeing who people are and what boxes they fall into, but how much are the people across the business engaging with all the inclusive practices that you've got.
Monica, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Nicola just said. I think you do have to actually measure that engagement piece to know, is something working, is it effective, and is it actually working for the people it was designed for? Because I think sometimes, I'm just trying to think how to phrase this. I think sometimes organizations might put something in place that they think is what somebody wants without actually maybe speaking to them or actually looking at that engagement factor, looking at what they use or don't use. And then you end up kind of with maybe a theoretical perfect solution that in practicality is the thing. Like, I'm thinking of these images where they put the footpath in the wrong place, so there's all these footprints elsewhere. And that's kind of the thing that can happen when you're not measuring beyond sort of those high level statistics where you kind of go, got enough women recruited, yay, job done, instead of actually understanding more, are they happy in their roles? Have we got the facilities they need? Are there toilets close by? Because, you know, if you've been to to a nuclear power station, and, you know, I've been through that earlier in my career, you'd go and get changed to go on plant. The men could literally just go 2 minutes and change. Me, oh yeah, you've got to walk in the rain, trot, go all the way around. Finding toilets, some buildings didn't have women's toilets because there were no women in the teams. So it's things about really understanding those factors and things that make people feel, I'm picking up on what you said earlier, that they actually belong and are actually wanted to be part of that workforce.
I think that's so important, and it's quite shocking, isn't it, that in this day and age that there's not even toilets in a whole building. It's pretty terrible, really. I think a bit linked to that, again, not one of the pre-prepared questions, something that Rachel was discussing with us today as well. So obviously there are things that are quantifiable, but there's also qualitative things that are really, I don't know, maybe there are ways to measure them, but in terms of the culture, how people are being mentored, the kind of, as you say, how they feel in that organization. Can can we quantify that, or, you know, is that something that can't be quantified? Or does it not need to be quantified?
I would say it's useful to do engagement surveys, to kind of get that feedback, whether it's annually or at certain times, to see what the feeling is, to see how people are, to see if they're happy, to see if there's things you should be doing more. But then making sure that you're then following up on that feedback and actioning it, rather than just saying, well, we've done it. Yeah, just because you're not engaging with it, kind of making sure that you're engaging with what your workforce is telling you. Yeah.
I think to add to that, I think some ways in which it is quantified is retention rates out of the business, being blunt. So, you know, some organisations do track by different segments of the communities and within them, and they may notice that people returning from parental leave who can't get access to part-time or flexible working suddenly leave within a few months of coming back. And, you know, they do have that exit data, but it's whether people are analysing it. So I think there is that level of quantification, but then the rest of it, in terms of how people feel about certain things and whether they feel it's making a difference and they're engaged and want to stay in the organisation, that's a lot more of your qualitative stuff. And I mean, you could ask quantitative sort of scaled questions around those feelings, but some of it is that thing of actually talking, engaging, listening, and then tweaking stuff to see if it's what people need.
Scott, did you want to add anything?
I think I'd add that in universities, I guess from a university angle, the other way you can measure that is maybe not in terms of retention rates, because the university is one of those places you go to die, you go and then you never leave, but maybe on progression rates. So if people are happy and they're progressing, and if somebody's been here a long time and not gone anywhere, then that's somewhere you really need to look. And I think in terms of engagement, I think sometimes while in universities we survey people to death, and so you need to be really careful when you do survey. So for me, it's more important to make sure that all the committees, all the meetings, everything we have are totally inclusive in their representation. And then you hear that, if you hear that same story constantly everywhere, then you know people are happy, not happy.
Yeah. So I guess as well, that's making sure that you're maintaining a safe space, that people are giving honest feedback rather than just saying what they've got permission to say as well.
Yeah, I think being honest is a really good point. Moving on from that, what do you think the first steps are that an organisation can take to collect data around inclusion?
Make it easy. I mean, here it's hidden behind an HR system, and it's so difficult to collect data. And I think as well, make it so that you're not identifiable by filling in that data. Because I know probably still now, I don't like filling in data, because by the time I get to a certain point, it's obvious there's only me, and so I don't want to fill that in.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think about the trust aspect as well, in terms of being really clear about what you're collecting, why you're collecting it, what's going to actually happen with it. Maybe don't start on the exercise of maybe you've done a survey previously and you've not shared you know what you've done with it. And yeah, the point about not wanting to fill stuff out, I mean, sometimes I've been the only Black person in an organisation or in a team, and then the question comes up, oh, you know, what's your ethnicity? And I'm like, well, this is not going to be anonymous anymore, is it? So I'm like, and especially if there is something I've wanted to feed back. But then again, I've always kind of just told people if I've had an issue. So, but still, you don't necessarily always.
You want the choice.
You actually want to have that anonymity, and I think people forget that sometimes.
Absolutely can relate to that as well. Jackie, you had a question.
Yeah, it's really aimed at Nicola and Monica in your background. Yeah. Are you in these roles because somebody in industry asked you to do that? Is it industry led, or is it because you saw a need and do it?
Do you want to go first?
I don't mind you.
Well, for me, I've been working in laboratories for about 20 years, but and we did have policies in the previous companies, but when I joined this company now, when we joined them through acquisition, there was kind of a difference beyond the policies and beyond the groups and beyond the tick boxes, for want of a better word. There was kind of like it was a safe space. Leaders were engaged from the top, who were also empowering grassroots people to drive through policies. So it kind of felt like when I entered previous stuff as a lesbian, the mixed race with a hidden disability, it's quite obvious who it is saying anything. And so that made me feel vulnerable. Whereas here, I felt that I could kind of step up and be representation I hadn't seen myself, because I felt I had that protection around me and kind of I was listened to. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think sort of similar for me. So nobody asked me to do it. It was more sort of, so I've been in nuclear now nearly 20 years, which sometimes might harm if I'd done it, because when I entered sort of straight from uni, it was a complete culture shock. You know, I started my career at Sellafield. That was an experience, shall we say. And then just sort of over the years, not necessarily seeing people who looked like me, and then coming across people who either came from similar backgrounds, and then hearing them say a lot of the stuff that me and my friends used to say of, are we actually going to progress? Are we going to see leaders who maybe understand who we are, our identities, some of the additional challenges or the comments or just some of the nonsense you might deal with on a daily basis that isn't necessarily visible if you're just not aware of it because you're not experiencing it. And I think some of the sort of trigger points for me in terms of saying, okay, let's do something about it, was sort of waiting all these years and just seeing lots and lots of talk, and then the action not necessarily changing the things that I felt would be useful to change. And then it was like, well, maybe I could step forward and do something about it. And, you know, hearing people making comments like, oh, you need to be a heterosexual man to get to the top of an organization in this industry. And that really upset me, because I thought, looking around, looking at some of the examples, it was like, I see why you're saying that. So it kind of just spurred me on to say, okay, let's try and do something, and again, be some of that representation, and hopefully it will help to push things in a different direction. And I think getting to a stage where people are more willing to listen. And also, I think part of it being like, actually, I'm just going to say it.
Absolutely brilliant. And as you say, actually doing something rather than just talking, with a lot of people like today. Anyone else? Yeah.
I recently left an organisation separately, nothing to do with this, that had a lot of, should we say, the older generation. And one of the reasons I left was because of the very casual racism and sexism that was used in that environment. This seemed to be very, very typical of the older generation. So it's completely ingrained. It was so casual. It was obviously part of their makeup. Since there is still a number of the older generation in nuclear, how would you go about challenging that when it is something that is so built into?
Interesting questions. Anyone want to take that?
You have to call it out, and you have to keep calling it out, and you have to be brave enough to call it out. And if you do that, and then somebody else does that, and somebody else does that, and it's not just in nuclear, it's in academia, it's everywhere, but you have to call it out, because otherwise nobody will learn. If you just ignore it, and I don't blame you for leaving, but they never realise that anything's wrong. So we have to challenge them. And it's easier said than done. But maybe you get to a stage. I mean, I'm with you too. I've been through so much. I'm at the stage now where I don't care anymore, and I'm just going to say it. But it took me a long time to get there.
And they knew why I left. I made.
So you made your statement, yeah.
But they are aware why I left the organisation. Yeah, I didn't want to stay in it.
Did you want to add anything to the one?
Yeah, I would. I'd say I'm so sorry that you went through that. I hope you're a bit happy where you are. Yeah, and I think it's probably a common thing to a lot of us, and it's not acceptable. But I would say in terms of what we can do to challenge those attitudes, there's things like training, yes, but there's also people being empowered to challenge things at the same level, as well as waiting for leadership, but also that support from leadership, a commitment that the policies aren't policies, and when these things are seen, that it'll be followed up and dealt with, and make an example. But then also there's different ways of engaging stakeholders and trying to make people realise why the things that we're doing are important to our people. So we've been doing workshops with leaders where we've had people from different identity groups kind of in a closed space having a workshop talking about what their identity is and why it's important for them. We've connected up with other businesses. So our people in the business can see that it's not just something that we're pushing as a small group, but it's actually important to everybody. And if you're not engaged with this stuff, as much as it's the right thing to do, it's also what the industry demands. You know, you're not going to succeed yourself if you don't carry on. And then also kind of supporting people from different identities to feel that they can disclose things if they want to, knowing that they're safe.
Definitely, yeah. I agree with everything that you said. And I think, you know, businesses should put in the support so that you understand maybe how to call people in, call people out, who you can go to, how you can feel safe to do that. Because, you know, no one wants to go into work and potentially face, you know, what you went through, because it's not right. It shouldn't be happening. And there's the policies on the wall that tell you we don't tolerate this, but then actually it is tolerated. It's not zero tolerance. And it's, you know, I sometimes wonder if we totted up all the different incidents of casual sexism, casual racism, put them on the wall next to the health and safety statistics, would people actually pay more attention? Because if that many people are breaking their legs every day in the office, I'm sure something would be done, but we're not necessarily really understanding sometimes the harm it does to people when they're sort of exposed to that, you know, and there have been studies that show the damage that, you know, prejudice, discrimination has on people's health, you know, their physical health, their mental well-being and their social well-being. And then your point about sort of challenging people because it's ingrained in them, I would say if people can learn to use a smartphone and they can change and learn to use a computer, they need to understand the acceptable behaviours that are in the workplace. And I do think it does come down to leadership in a sense of, if you are saying we don't tolerate it, you then have to demonstrate it and show it isn't acceptable by maybe, you know, saying to someone, no, this isn't how we do things here anymore, and actually making sure it's understood that it's no longer going to wash. But sometimes people don't want to go that far. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think also there are, I agree that there's a lot of the older generation have these views, but also unfortunately a lot of the younger generation, more than people care to admit,
Yeah.
have this as well, and being aware of both ends, that I think is really important. Hamza?
I agree with what you're saying, of course, but I mean, how, you know, if you look around this room, I think many of the people that were causing that distress to you are not here. How do you get them to attend these seminars so they can, how do you make them care, you know?
So I'm going to give an answer, which maybe people won't like, but, and this is something I flick between, and please challenge me on this or add to this, but I think sometimes some people are never going to care, unfortunately. And I think sometimes our approach has to be that there almost has to be enough of a groundswell of others around them to help stamp it out so that they know it isn't actually tolerated. So it's maybe the people who maybe used to go and make little jokes about within the corner, say to them, no, we're not taking part of it. It almost serves as, you know, it's like fish in water, that the water's starting to change around them and the fish can still survive, but it knows that, you know, some of the other fish may not talk to it, excuse me, in quite the same way. So I think for some people that they don't want to change, they don't want to know. Whereas it might be better to go for the people who may be in the middle, who might at least be able to influence the behaviours in a positive direction of the others and put the energy into that rather than getting quite frustrated. I mean, I'd love it if some people have that whole 360 or 180 sort of revelation and change, and some people do, but it's a balance, and I haven't got an easy answer for you on that.
Yeah. Thank you.
What, Nicola, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I was going to say certainly around that is trying to drive allyship through your organisations, which is the people that maybe don't fit into the groups or don't completely understand, trying to raise awareness and allyship to kind of support underrepresented groups as well. I was going to say something else, I can't remember what it was. So.
I don't think I'd add anything else. I think you're right. You pick the people that you stand the chance of. There's no point with some people banging your head against the wall. Unfortunately, you just have to wait for them to retire and go away. But while you're converting everybody else, you know, those people will slowly realise they'll be in the minority. The likelihood is maybe not. But one thing I don't believe is saying, well, let's send you on a course now, you're rehabilitated, because that doesn't work. They go on a course and it makes no difference.
Yeah.
Adrian, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think that's probably the most stale male and pale person in the room. I would just comment in terms of how we deal with it. I think it's about senior leadership calling one another, because people follow the examples that they see from leadership and people in senior positions. And in the same way that the strong safety culture in the industry by people leading by example, it shouldn't just be left to the people who are at the wrong end of whether it's some kind of being excluded to stand up for themselves and call it out from their position. It should be others who see that happening to call it out. I've had an experience where I did a presentation and I flippantly used the term that I think on a very soft swear word. In a presentation, somebody contacted me afterwards and said, I wasn't offended, but I know from some of my circle, there are people who would find that term, an unfortunate term to use. I'm mortified. I took it in the chin. I've never used it again. So I think my experience would be call it out. I mean, the telling thing is people's response when they are called out. But if they try and belittle, that's that is the wrong response. It's learning from it and trying to understand why they have perhaps inadvertently caused a problem for somebody with the terminology that's used or the actions that they've taken. I just perhaps going back to the previous question and to give a short comment on that. In terms of the inclusion versus diversity and measuring, I would see diversity as something that a good HR department would be able to measure quite effectively. It's about data and stats. I see inclusion as being all about behaviour, not about who is in the workforce, the small actions that they take on a daily basis. And the only way to measure that is to hear from people on the ground about their experiences of being included or seeing other people.
I think that's a really good point, and a really good point about how people who are from underrepresented backgrounds often are the ones fighting for their own rights. And if you look at any kind of EDI committee in many institutions, there's hardly any white men there at all. And maybe they should be, because they have the time, they have more time than a lot of other people to do this kind of stuff. But anyway, any other comments from no? Okay, brilliant. The next question is, when it comes to identifying goals for measuring inclusion, would you recommend setting high targets or starting small?
I think you should start. Monica and I both have a go at starting.
Well, okay, I would say, in terms of, I was thinking about this one before, and I think you have to aim high. You have to. There shouldn't be well, that's enough, because it shouldn't be enough. So I would say aim high with your targets, but also maybe have milestones each year, or each year review where you are towards getting towards that target. Have you improved on the last year? Is the things that you haven't done well that you should do better? Is the things that you could do to change things more? So I think you should always aim high. I don't think enough is enough.
I would totally echo that. I think people don't aim high because they want to set the target they think they can achieve, and that's the wrong way to set a target. Right? You need to aim high, and I think the worst thing you can do is aim small, because if you go small, you end up putting someone in an organisation in a position where they are the only one, and that's the worst. Then they are going to feel really uncomfortable. So you never want to be, by trying to be inclusive and diverse, make someone feel totally isolated.
Yeah, completely agree with that. And I think you've got to be ambitious. But I'd say within that, in terms of the targets, don't discount maybe some of the everyday things that could have a massive impact on someone who's maybe affected by a particular issue. Because I think I was saying earlier, that sometimes it's that lack of understanding of what someone's going through, particularly when you're not from the same group as them and you don't necessarily know what could make a difference for them. And something that might feel like it's minor within all of the goals and targets could make a massive change to their daily experience in the organisation. So it's balancing that out and understanding, I think, organisational context alongside that. But I do think if we're going to radically shift the industry in the direction we want it to, we have to be incredibly ambitious, because being incredibly ambitious founded this industry. So why can't some of that be harnessed to take some of this step now?
Actually, it's such a good point.
Can I just add something to that? Because I think something Monica said there is really important, because I think sometimes there's always the temptation to try and do the really big things, and actually sometimes just doing small things has that sort of butterfly effect, and it has a much bigger impact than you think it might. And I think generally we worry about asking, well, what can we do? We tend to do what we think we should do, rather than asking, well, what would make a difference? And sometimes it's just the little things.
Absolutely. Adrian, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think this is an area where you have to be really careful, because it's possible that very well-intentioned bold target setting can actually end up being not inclusive. To take an example, if you're looking for gender diversity and you're aiming for a 50-50 gender split in your workforce, if you're a very technically focused organisation, and the STEM sort of gene pool that is coming out of academia that you're recruiting from is 3/4 male, then having a 50-50 target is actually excluding a sector of that population, because you're encouraging people to discriminate positively. So getting target setting to be inclusive, whilst, are we aiming for the workforce, or are we trying to increase the diversity of the recruitment pool that workforce is tapping into? You can have those, you can have inclusion and diversity in context.
Does the panel have any response to that point?
I'm not sure I agree with that, but I'm trying to think of why. I'm trying to think of how to.
Long-term target setting.
I agree, but the thing is, the STEM population you're recruiting from is like that, because unless you change, so in order to diversify that population, you have to make a change there.
Yes.
And in a way, you have to perturb it somewhere, don't you? So I think just saying, well, we can't recruit 50% from there because there's only 15% or 20%. I don't think that's the right thing. I don't know. I don't know in my head that isn't right, but I can't quite articulate.
It depends. I would say it depends. I wouldn't say 50-50. I'd say 40-40 something else, just rather than two. But I would say that if we're going to be bold in those sort of targets, we should also think about the pipeline for our industry. If we're building things that are going to last hundreds of years, it's not just who's sitting in university now and who's taking A-levels now. We should also be focusing on our social value responsibilities and feeding into communities and showing diverse representation and bringing more people into science, rather than just focusing on the short term in the next 5-10 years. So I think we should probably be more ambitious.
I think that short-term versus long-term.
Yeah,
What you don't want to do is have short-term ambitious targets that drive the wrong behaviours.
Yeah, I get that.
Positive discrimination.
Yeah.
I think I'd say on that is, if companies have truly got an inclusive recruitment approach and policy, and and then it comes out one year that then suddenly it's completely changed the gender dynamic mix across who's coming into the organisation, then they know they're getting it right. And it may be for some years, actually, you've suddenly got 70% women coming through, 10% from non-binary, etc., coming through, just because they finally got the adverts right, the interviewing right, the assessment centres right. And they might almost feel like it's a bit of an overcorrection for all the years when it was the opposite way, when it was literally just men all the time, and people just didn't notice until one day they woke up and realised, oh, I've not seen someone else walking around this building. So I think it's naturally going to be kind of those peaks and troughs almost, as things eventually come to more of a balance point. So yeah,
definitely.
Ask it from your industry, well, no industry, I'm post-COVID, then the attitudes of working at home or flexible working, have you seen a change coming through from that? It's not a rigid 9 to 5 previous patterns. Does that make things more accessible to a diverse workforce?
we're live streaming, aren't we? In theory, yes. I'm trying to choose my words, because some organisations are being less flexible now, so they're mandating so many days in the office, and that is now having an impact in terms of how people feel about being in the workplace, whether we're going to see a shift in terms of some of the retention numbers off the back of some of these policies. It's a little bit early to tell. My gut feeling is probably, if that balance isn't quite right. So it has massive potential to change. It has massive potential to change that, but I think it depends on the leadership culture and true commitment to being flexible, and maybe not going back to how things were before, because that was the managerial comfort zone. So I don't know if you've observed anything or heard any sort of anecdotes, Nicola.
Yeah, I would say there has been a shift. There has been a shift to more of a expectation that people are there, that people are in the office more often. but I think you kind of have to make sure that you're not driving presenteeism, and if people are more productive and secure working from home, then companies need to address that. It, for whatever reasons the employees are choosing, whether it is caring responsibilities, parental things, or even just that the office is too busy and people can't focus because they're surrounded by noise. But I think it goes back to feedback now, having seen, not that I'm advocating for a pandemic, because that's a bit, but of all the test cases that we could have had, isn't that just incredible that as a whole industry we kept going, we kept delivering, we kept designing, we kept constructing in completely new set of circumstances. So if we could do that, why would we go back to the old way? And I think we'll see in terms of engagement data and attrition and feedback, we'll see that we'll see whether people value that and whether they're choosing companies that offer those more flexible work structures.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, though, I think with the current cost of living as well, I don't know if that's going to potentially mask decisions from people. And I think sometimes organizations forget that, because, you know, during the pandemic, when all these different incidents were happening, Black Lives Matter, and speaking to different leaders, and some of them were saying to me, "Oh, nobody's saying that there's racism in our organization." And I would counter that and say, well, you know, the pandemic's here, we're not sure what's going to happen, people are worried about their job security. Are they going to tell you if they're worried about keeping a roof over their heads about stuff that they're going through? So you need to think about maybe how you get that feedback mechanism in place. And obviously the times we're in now at the moment, yes, I saw something about inflation's risen slightly less this month than last month or something, but again, people have financial pressures and concerns, and for some people they may prioritize that aspect over anything else.
I think that links back to what both you and Scott said about anonymity. If you don't have that anonymity either, you're not going to feel comfortable, are you, sharing?
Can I just add to Jackie's question actually about, I think that from my perspective, there were two interesting effects of the pandemic. I think the first one, in terms of, has it changed who we employ and how we, I think from a university point, we've definitely embraced flexible working. And I think the very senior leadership team at the university realised that that can be a very powerful tool and allow us to recruit different people that we maybe wouldn't have recruited before. So I think that has had a positive effect. And I think the other unforeseen positive effect was, I know during the pandemic, maybe more of my male colleagues were working from home and experiencing childcare and trying to work and juggle doing a PowerPoint presentation while looking after a small child, and that had an impact on their research that it probably would never have had otherwise. And they appreciated, I think, more what their female colleagues and wives and partners go through. So it wasn't an intended consequence, but I think this has impacted my career. And you go, yes, and it's impacted her career for the last 40 years. So, be grateful for small mercies. So I think it did have some very interesting effects.
Yeah, absolutely. Mwanje, did you have a question?
I kept thinking about what you said, and is it fine to go back to the question? I think it's important to question also why you're getting a lot more applicants of, in this case, a lot more male applicants than female applicants. And I was thinking of representation, right? If you grow up, and there are many studies on this, if you go on Google and Google scientists, you're probably going to get a lot of white males. And so if you make an effort, even with a 75-25% applicant pool, if you make an effort to employ 50-50 or 40-40-10, then future people will grow up seeing more people like themselves in these positions, and they're going to get more used to the idea that I too could be an academic. And then you'll see a gradual shift from 75-25 to a more representative distribution.
No, I think that's a really good point. I think trying to get a better mix in the applicants for roles is really important, and making an organisation, whether it's an academic organisation or industry, as welcoming as possible to the underrepresented elements of that workforce should definitely be a challenge. So,
Thank you. So my next question is, are you aware of any good practices or lessons learned from other sectors that can be applied to nuclear? Scott smiling.
I guess it depends on what you. So for me, another sector is industry,
Mhm.
and I've learned lots of really great things that are happening in industry, in the NDA, in the big organisations, in EDI, that I'm, and because it's been driven from the top, because the chief exec is not just saying it, but it happens at every meeting and meeting culture and things like that, that I would love to be able to bring in to universities. So that's where I look for my inspiration.
Can you give any specific examples, or if you're not allowed to share, that's also okay.
Are we live streaming?
Yeah, we're live streaming.
I'd probably rather not.
Okay, no, that's fine.
I
I've
think,
got
I
enough.
think just sort of, I think one of the striking things to me was about culture in meetings and how meetings are handled, and I think if we could adopt strategies like that at the university, if we could get senior leadership to buy in, then that would have a really big impact.
Nicola?
I was actually thinking about, it might be a surprise in terms of diversity, but the defence industry in terms of how they've made a platform talking about mental health and about kind of supporting people with different challenges or different stresses, and kind of supporting them and including them and calling it out and being somewhere where people can feel safe to say that they're struggling. But that was kind of one example that kind of came to mind.
A really important one. Monica, do you have anything on that?
Yeah, so things like on LinkedIn, I don't know who uses LinkedIn, but I don't know if you've noticed they've got the tool where you can record your name so that then people can pronounce it properly. But that actually came from a LinkedIn employee who noticed people were struggling with his name. So he went to management and said, can we change this and have like recording of people's voices within the company, and maybe we should add it to the platform as well, because yeah, it's just, there's only so many times you can correct people, and it's just nice. And now it's like, I love it. I'm like, I've recorded it on LinkedIn. You can listen to it, and stuff like that. So I think that's one example. And then I was reading an article sort of earlier about a medical school in California where they managed to change the intake of their classes because they noticed that the classes were originally very male, very white, and that doesn't fully reflect the populations across that California state and so forth and so forth. And they had different sort of legal restrictions around what they could do. But then the article goes through some of the different stages they went through, and they talk about funding, investment, long-term planning. But one of the steps they took was to look at who was assessing all the applicants, and then changing who was in that team, making sure that the criteria was less subjective. No, wait, is that the right word? Yeah, it was less subjective, so that then that way it meant there wasn't that room for people to just like, oh, they're a good person and all that stuff, to really make it quantifiable, make sort of really clear criteria to then sort of level the playing field from that perspective. And there was quite a few other points that they shared about how they've done it and why, and sort of bringing all of that forward as well. Just trying to think if there's any other industries, because lots of industries have initiatives and programs and different things that they're doing with varying degrees of success, but some of them have got quite different starting points as well to where nuclear is.
And I think linked to that, so if you have to draw a roadmap towards inclusion for an organization that's at the beginning of its journey, I mean, I don't think nuclear is at the very beginning, but it's not far off the beginning. What elements would you include in such a roadmap?
Shall I jump in?
Yeah, you start.
Oh, sorry.
You start. We'll have bits of the map.
Well, I think each organisation needs to understand where it's actually starting from. And, some do have some demographic data, so they maybe understand who's visible, who's present in their workforce, for example, and they may have an understanding of who they might like to bring in. Excuse me, but then some organisations may not even be aware of all the different layers of identity within the organisation, so they may need to start with that data point. So it's about the context, understanding what your organization is like, and then maybe mapping it out across the employee life cycle or the sort of work life cycle. So looking from the recruitment through to the onboarding, through to people's experiences, the career progression, so forth, so forth, so forth. But it's about understanding, do you know where your challenges are? And if actually an organization does know, actually we're not seeing enough women or enough disabled people, etc., progressing to senior management, then that's a really clear starting point to move their roadmap along. So I think it depends on where you are within your organization, some of that cultural context around it, who's in the organization, and then making sure it's applicable and is going to work for who you're trying to keep engaged, and then who you might wish to engage as well.
Yes, that's what I was gonna go on to in terms of the structures around driving that roadmap to where you want it to be. So whether it's how you deliver awareness training, how you create safe spaces, what support structures you have for people from underrepresented groups, so that they can share the lived experiences with their own community, as well as, if they want to, sharing it with allyship to spread awareness. And then and then I guess kind of facilitating how those connections can all be made, to make sure that people feel like people within the organisation. Yes.
I think the first thing, if you're starting right from the beginning, is you need to make sure your organisation understands why they need to change, and that they buy in and they understand the benefits for them and for the organisation. Because if you don't do that to start with, you can draw this roadmap, but they'll get to this point where we've ticked that box, but it won't ever move because they're just ticking boxes. And I think one thing that does worry me in this space is we're all very good at drawing these roadmaps, but I don't think we're very good at having that first why conversation. And if you spend enough time having that why and getting buy-in, then actually the rest of it comes much easier. But that's the hardest bit. So and we all want to get somewhere, don't we, where we can tick something off and say we've done this. So I think sometimes we try to run before we can walk.
Absolutely. I had a question, because I'm aware we've got a lot of students in the room. Do you have any advice you would give to people who are currently doing PhD projects within nuclear, potentially going into the future nuclear workforce? If you have any advice you would like to share with them. Or if our students have any advice they would like to feedback as well, that it can go both ways.
I think it'd be quite easy to say, well, what are your perceptions of the industry? Is there something we can maybe do better, or there's some bridges that maybe need to be built, or is it all good? Because I don't always know how transparent things are and whether it's obvious that certain things are happening or not. So I'd be interested to hear that. And in terms of advice, I'd say look at the organisations, maybe Google pay gap reports if they have to publish them, because I do think that's something that gives you a bit of an indication, but also like read the reasoning around it and the context, because you can get a sense of the organisation of, are they actually committed? Are they wanting to drive change in this area? If because it is there, it's public information, gives you a sense of what they're doing. And maybe Google, see what the leadership team's like, if you are wondering what the environment's like and you're thinking about progression as well. And I think it's doing that due diligence and research, but you're never going to know until you get inside. And I think it's obviously remembering that sometimes people's behaviour, if you do experience anything negative, says a lot more about them than it says about you. And that it is okay to kind of stand up for yourself, and it is okay to say, no, that's not acceptable. But there may be times when you feel you can't, or you don't feel safe to do that as well. And that is completely okay, and not to sort of beat yourself up about it. Because I remember early in my career, some of the stuff I was going through, and I was not in a place to speak up about it. But now I am, and that's okay as well. So I think that's sort of my advice based on that.
Yeah, I'd agree 100% with Monica. And I'd also say don't feel that you have to settle for an organisation that doesn't completely align with your values. If there's things there that are important to you and that organisation isn't delivering it, that interview, you've got things that you can offer to that company. You don't have to compromise if it doesn't align, either when you're joining or when you're there. Don't feel you have to settle because you're the future of the industry. You're the ones that are going to deliver it. You're the ones that are going to lead the next steps in our culture. So yeah, don't settle.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to make exactly that point. You're a really valuable commodity and everybody wants you. So actually you're interviewing them probably more than they're interviewing you. Don't be frightened to ask those questions that Monica said.
Yeah.
So, but we had a CDT event recently and we asked the PhD students, got all these companies here, what do you want to ask them? They said, we want to know what their CEO gets paid. We want to know their gender pay gap. We want to know their sort of what their EDI policies are. And then the companies all came up and it was really shocking. Some of them, great, they could answer it. It was all, others made, every mistake that you would say, if you had to write the 101 of what not to do, they did that. So, and that had a real impact on the students. And she was like, I want to work for that company. I don't want to work for that company. So the world's your lobster, I would say.
Definitely. I don't know if any students want to respond to that. Or... Also, we have team copies, so you can respond to that. Afterwards, if you want to do it in private. I think we've got time. Oh, yeah, Adrian, go ahead. Yeah.
The other side of the table is somebody who's done a lot of interviewing from industry. I always sort of find it say it's a bit like dating. It isn't just about, being the person who the company would choose. It's about making the company sell themselves to you, or you can be employer. It doesn't have to be a commercial organisation, but it's people will respect you always for asking questions in an interview, and that doesn't just have to be questions about what's the pay like and what's the career progression like. It can be about the organisation's values, the ED&I policy. Are there people like me in your organisation? If so, who are they? If not, why the heck not? And get asked those questions. And as an interviewer, I would respect somebody who asks that kind of question, and I would want to make sure I can answer it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really, really good point. You have to ask questions at interview. We always encourage that of our applicants on the Fusion CDC. So yeah, I think that's a really good one. I'm conscious that we've only got a minute left. Do any of our panelists want to make any final comments before we close the event?
I don't know. Well, I would say it's really refreshing that we're having these sort of conversations, that we're engaging with people that are about to join the industry, that are people in academia, that are people from industry that have worked there a long time. And there's kind of a positive, there's kind of a momentum for change. So yeah, it's refreshing. It's why I've got more involved in this, and it's positive. It's a positive insight.
Brilliant. Scott?
I think I would just add to that. I mean, I've been here 20 years, more than 20 years, I know, and literally nothing happened, and now you can really, it's like, it feels like the stars are sort of perfectly aligned, and if we don't do things right now, then I think we're never going to do things right.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a really optimistic time, and I think I would just say, just be brave and stand up for what you think and believe in, and be true. If you can go to bed every night and look yourself in the eye and think, I did that okay, then I think that's a good place to.
Monica?
They've kind of covered most of the points, but I think it's if there's something you're sort of going to maybe do differently or think differently about following sort of today or other discussions, talk to other people about it, and let's keep pushing that momentum and keep sort of spreading that information, really, is all I'd say.
Brilliant. I think that's a good place to end. So please join me in thanking Monica, Nicola, and Scott, and